All right, thank you, choir. Well, we're in a culture where we just don't spend a lot of money on Christmas gifts. We spend a lot of money decorating the Christmas gifts that we've already spent a lot of money on. Americans will spend somewhere around $3 billion this December on wrapping paper to wrap the gifts that they've already spent a lot of money on, hoping that'll make them look better. But oftentimes it doesn't turn out that way. So I Googled Christmas wrapping fails. And no, none of your pictures came up. But there seem to be several different categories of Christmas wrapping fails. Okay? Here's the first category. Some people just have no clue how to wrap a gift. Or how about this one? Okay. There's another category. It's when you wrap the presents, it's so obvious what it is, why bother wrapping it? Why not just stick a bow on it? Here's another one. Another category is, it's obvious you don't even like the person who you're wrapping the gift for. It says, idiot sister, to my idiot sister by brother. And notice the zip ties. That's surrounded by zip ties. Another category would be those who must have just ran out of wrapping paper. And they just go for the sack with duct tape and some names on it. So anyway, lots of Christmas wrapping fails. And some people consider the first Christmas to be a Christmas wrapping fail. And they're not talking about flying reindeer and some big guy that comes down through the chimney. They're not talking about things like that. They're talking about moving stars and angels singing and a virgin birth and the fact that it was God become flesh. See, if we're not careful, the way Christmas was wrapped can cause us to lose sight of the gift itself. And whether we realize it or not, we're willing to admit it or not, we're in danger of losing one of our most basic doctrines, one of the most critical and crucial things that we should be about this Christmas. And one of the reasons why it's so dangerous for us to lose that, let me back up. Am I backing up? Okay. One of the reasons why we're in danger of losing that is because everybody loves Christmas. As long as we're not too specific about who Jesus is and was. For example, you never hear a pastor at Easter time get up and say, let's keep Christ in Easter. You'll never hear a pastor at Easter time say, Jesus is the reason for the season concerning Easter, because Easter, we pretty much kept that about the resurrection. But you hear all the time, let's keep Christ in Christmas. Why? Because everybody loves Christmas, as long as you're not too specific about who Jesus is. Case in point, Guinness Book of World Records. The most expensive Christmas tree ever decorated in the history of the world. It was in 2010. Abu Dhabi. Not regular Dubai, but Abu Dhabi. There's a difference there. In United Arab Emirates. Put on by the Emirates Palace. In other words, the Emirates, the emirs, the leaders, put this Christmas tree on display. Valued at over $11 million. We have so distorted Christmas that the most expensive Christmas tree ever decorated in the world was decorated and put in the middle of a mall in a country where you better not convert to Christianity. You see, everybody loves Jesus as long as he's just a good person, a good teacher, a prophet, someone who did good works, someone who has some words of wisdom. And if that's who Jesus is, Mormons love Jesus with that criteria. Muslims love Jesus. Buddhists love Jesus. Hindus love Jesus. I'll never forget going into Beijing about a week before Christmas. And we walk in this hotel in Beijing, China, not too far from there. We would call it their Capitol building. And in this hotel, in the lobby of the hotel, was this huge Christmas tree. Had a manger scene underneath it. They're in Beijing, China. Everybody loves Jesus, as long as you're not too specific about who he was and who he is. Who Jesus was and who he is has been lost on us. Not only just lost in our culture, but lost in our church. And our church is. The one person who had no problem with this, who knew exactly who Jesus was and is, was Mary. Because here's what the angel told Mary. And the angel told her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. Now listen, you will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will name him Jesus." Jesus, the English word, it came from a Latin word, it came from a Greek word, it came from a Hebrew word, meaning Yeshua or Joshua. And he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and his kingdom will have no end. Little version problem going through my mind right now. But here's the thing. Mary knew she was giving birth to a king. Okay? To a king. A king whose kingdom would have no end. Who is going to reign, who does still reign. That's difficult for us to grasp. The question that we need to ask is he your king? That's what we're going to be looking at this morning. Is he your king, or is he just a conscience reliever? Is he just somebody that you go to as a final solution because you can't find a solution anywhere else, so you run to Jesus? Is he just an icon? Is he just a tattoo that you have, or just a cross that you wear around your neck? Because the one thing we need to come to grips with is Jesus' right to reign in our life as king. That has become lost on us. Oh, we sing about it, but the fact is it has become lost on us. So this was sort of Mary and Joseph's secret, that Jesus was going to be God's final king whose reign was never going to end. And if it weren't for some sincere yet somewhat confused magi, that secret would have been kept for another 30 years at least. So let's look at the story. Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod. Now, King Herod, he was a great architect. He was a military strategist. He was also very ruthless and also dead set on preserving his dynasty. In King Herod's time, wise men, these were not kings despite the song. That's a 3rd century myth that we incorporated. And there were not 3 of them despite all our nativity scenes. We assume there was 3 because there were 3 gifts. There could have been 2 of them. There could have been 48 of them. We don't know. And these wise men, more than likely, were part of the courts in Persia. And they would have been, if you want to say employed, their main duty would have been to look at the heavens and see the movement of the planets, the movement of the stars, and see if there's any divine messages there. And lo and behold, they are looking up at the stars one night, and a new star appears. And they said, this is signaling the birth of a king. Not just a king, a Jewish king. And so what did they do? They loaded up And they went to where they thought if a Jewish king is going to be born, the most logical place would be Jerusalem. So they head to Jerusalem, spend months traveling to Jerusalem. They weren't following a star, okay? That's why they wound up in the wrong place. That's why they went to Jerusalem and not to Bethlehem, because they weren't following a star. Here's the next verse that we read. And they came to town saying, where is he who was born king of the Jews? So asking, where is he? Where is he? For we saw his star at its rising. That's how we know they weren't following a star. They saw the star as it rose up, but now it's gone. And so they just head to Jerusalem because that's a logical place to find a Jewish king. And they're going around asking, where is he who's born king of the Jews? Where's the one who is born the king of the Jews? And so word got around. And so that's why we come to this next verse. When King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Why? Why is it such a big deal? Because if it was just a rabbi that was born, no big deal. Lots of rabbis. Just a teacher, lots of teachers. Just a prophet, lots of prophets. But a king, not just a king, the king, God's final king, whose reign will never end. Ooh, that's a problem. See, Herod was right to feel threatened. See, Herod had it all planned out. When he died, he was going to divide his kingdom among his sons, and they were all going to be kings around that area. He'd already had it all worked out with Rome, how he was going to make this happen. But now, his legacy may not happen because a king is born. Herod knew what we sometimes just get messed up and what we forget, what we sort of look over. This is going to be a threat to his dynasty. A king being born. Because if king's born, you have to choose. Herod was not one to just sit idly by and see how things work out. He'd been king for over 40 years, okay? He didn't stay that way because of an attitude, okay, yeah, I think it'll work out. He stayed that way because he was proactive. He was ruthless. And he wasn't just going to sit idly by while some other king was born and going to ruin his whole dynasty. He wasn't going to do it. And so this is what he did. Next verse. So he assembled all the chief priests and scribes of the people and asked them where the Christ would be born. Did you catch that? They came looking for a king. Where's the king? What does Herod do? Where's the Christ? Not just a Christ, the Christ going to be born. Christ comes from Messiah. It's the Greek word for Messiah, the anointed one. God's final king. Whenever they were asking, where's the king? You know, where's he at? We know he's born. Where's the king? So we can come and worship him. Where's he at? Herod knew what they were talking about. And he saw this as a threat. Because a king, that means a regime change. A king, that means maybe an uprising, maybe a civil war. So he saw this as a threat. And so he said, let's find out where the Christ, because that's what he understood they were asking for. God's final king, where the Christ is going to be born. Christ, the anointed one. Anointed by who? Anointed by men? No. Anointed by prophets? No. Anointed by other kings? No. Anointed by God. Where is the Christ going to be born? I read this past week, Luke chapter 23, and I noticed, I just saw the times where Jesus was referred to as the King of the Jews, and then the Christ, and then the Messiah, and there's like 6 or 7 times in that chapter where it just goes back and forth referring to Jesus as the Christ or the Messiah. And you see that all through the Bible. So Herod was right to feel threatened by this, because when a king is born, you have to choose. There's a choice you have to make. And this is where our lives sort of intersect with Herod. Because Herod, he wasn't a Jew, but he adopted the Jewish religion, as we would say. He adopted Yahweh as a god, and he would be involved in their rituals. He'd be involved in their sacrifices. He took a lot of his own money. He also raised taxes from the people, but he used a lot of his own money to build Herod's temple, one of the wonders of the world, for the Jewish people. He had no problem at all being involved in their rituals, being involved in their sacrifices, providing this temple for them. But bow his knee to another king, give up his dynasty, his legacy to another king? Never. Never. And this is where his life intersects with ours. Because we're in a culture where, with a bunch of people, as far as Jesus is concerned, that's fine. That's when I die, or that's in this area of my life, or this is Jesus confined to this part of my life. But to bow our knees to a king? Never. Forgive? I'm not going to forgive. Not them, not after what they've done. Love them? No. I can't love them. God, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to obey my king by loving that person. I'm not going to put others first. And we resist. Jesus is fine as long as he's a sin forgiver, as long as he gets me to heaven when I die, as long as he's just a nice guy and gives me some good wisdom every now and then. But bow to him as my king? Never. You see, here's where we got to make the distinction between believing who Jesus is and bowing to him as our king. See, Herod believed. That's what we read in verse 4. So he believed. Why? So he assembled all the chief priests and scribes of the people and asked them, where's the child will be born at? Because he believed. He believed in Jesus. We go back and read this next verse. And Herod secretly summoned the wise men and asked them the exact time the star appeared. Why would he ask that? Because he believed that the final king had been born. And he believed who he was. He was the Messiah, the anointed one. And so he summons him up and says, when you find out where he's at, you don't wait a day, don't wait a week. Right away, you send word back to me. But why does he want to know the exact time? Because he wanted to know exactly how old he was so he could take action. So he could do something about it. He believed. There's no doubt that he believed. He would not surrender his will, and he certainly would not surrender his legacy. He believed that the Messiah, God's final king, had been born. And he knew that he'd have to make a choice. So we read this. After hearing the king, they went on their way, and there it was. The star reappeared. They had the star that they had seen at its rising. It led them until it came and stopped above the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overwhelmed with joy. Entering not the manger, the house. Because evidently, Mary and Joseph had hung around Bethlehem for a while, months, we don't know, year and a half, but long enough where Jesus was no longer a baby. It's not that they're not using the term for baby, but as a child. And they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and falling to their knees, they worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him the gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They did what they would do to any king, especially God's final king, especially one who they believed was God in the flesh. They bowed down and they worshiped. They worshiped. All right, now we're going to fast forward to about 10 years after the resurrection. The city of Antioch, one of the wealthiest and largest cities in the Roman Empire, about 300 miles above Jerusalem. There were some Greeks and Romans in that city. They decided that Jesus was Christos to them, the Christ, the anointed one, God's final king. And they began to obey him, to make him the Lord of their life. And here's what you need to understand about Rome at that time. Rome didn't care who your gods were. They could care less. You could have any god you want. You could have all the gods you want. You could have one. You could have 100. You could have any name for them you want to. As long as you paid allegiance to Caesar, you're good to go. But now in Antioch, for these guys, that wasn't good enough anymore. Because now Jesus is the Christos, the Christ, God's final king. And what do you do when there's a king? You have to make a choice. Are you going to bend your knee to him or not? And they chose to obey and to follow Christos as their Lord, as their king. And what did that mean for them? That meant that they would bear each other's burdens. That meant that they would love people that other people wouldn't love. They would love people anyway, even though they didn't want to, didn't feel like it. But he's their Lord, and that's what they wanted to do. They would love people. They'd forgive people. It's almost impossible to offend them because they would just forgive you. Not only that, when it came time to worship, they didn't do what other people who worship their gods did, offer up sacrifices. They didn't do that anymore. They came together and would sing songs and express gratitude to their king who had sacrificed himself for them. Not only that, all distinctions across society as far as they're concerned were gone. There's no more Greek or Roman or Jew or Gentile or slave or free or male or female. Slave owners would refer to their slaves as brothers and sisters. The rich people would refer to their poor as brothers and sisters. And as their king commanded, they would submit to their earthly authorities because that's what he commanded them to do, as long as it didn't interfere with their ultimate submission to the king, God's final king. And eventually, Rome saw them as criminals. Why? Not because of what they believed, but it's because who they said was their Lord and who they would obey. That's why. Every single time a person says Jesus Christ, he's proclaiming Christ as the king. See, that's our problem. We think of Jesus, we think of Christ. We think Christ, we think of Jesus. We think that's his last name. It wasn't a name, it's a title that we're so flippant with, we don't even understand what it means, and certainly we don't want to apply it to our lives. When a king is born, Herod understood this. You have to choose. He understood that. See, God has invited us to participate in his kingdom. And we choose whether or not we're going to do that. We like to say, oh, I believe, but we don't want to participate. We don't want to bow to him in our lives. But those things aren't separate. We think of them separate, but that they weren't back then. I came across this from, it's from C.S. Lewis, anyway. Here's what C.S. Lewis says. When Jesus shows up again, it will be the end of the world. Not a baby in a manger. Not a teacher on a hillside. This is no longer a man who can be bound, flogged, and crucified. Next time he shows up as king, it will be without disguise. So overwhelming that it will strike either irresistible love or irresistible horror into every creature. Why? Because in that moment, those who didn't choose to follow will wish they had. It will be too late then to choose your side. When you see the whole natural universe melting away, something so beautiful to some of us and so terrible to others that none will have any choice left. There is no use saying you choose to lie down when it becomes impossible to stand up. That will not be the time for choosing. It will be the time we discover which side we really have chosen, whether we realize it before or not. When a king is born, you have to choose. Herod understood this. He resisted. The Magi understood it, and they worshiped. When Jesus is just confined in our lives to being that little conscious reliever and someone that will provide forgiveness for us and someone who's like a good luck charm, someone who's our last resort that we turn to. It just shows that really he's not our king. We've already made our choice. And then here's the thing, he's not going to force you. He's not going to force you to bow down to him. He gives you that choice. And part of the problem is, maybe for you, for me, when I was a kid and growing up, we were told, invite Jesus Christ into your heart so that you can go to heaven when you die. Which, yes, all that is good and true. But if you follow the Gospels, it's not only believe in Jesus, it's participate in his kingdom. Is he going to reign in your life? See, he came. Well, I'm struggling with how to put this because it's so simple, yes, so difficult at times. He came to bring a kingdom that's not of this world, but is for this world. To reign in our lives today. And we want to separate those two things. We think you can believe in him, but you don't necessarily have to surrender him as your Lord, bow your knee to him. In fact, it's been a long time. About 30 years ago, we had these little theological, I won't say controversies, but I guess they really are like a controversy in the Christian world, in the American Christian world. They don't deal with this stuff in other places. It's just America where we deal with stuff like this. But one, for example, the last one about 20 years ago was Calvinism. That was one, what do we think about that? But before that, about 30, 35 years ago, it was, can Jesus be your Savior and not be your Lord? I don't know. I look at that thing, how stupid to think you got a choice. But that's just where we're at in our culture. We think we have a choice. You think that you can believe in him and not bow your knee to him? Herod knew better than that. He knew he'd have to choose. He resisted. Because he was not about to bow his knee. He was not about to surrender his legacy. You think that you could come, especially at Christmas, because everybody loves Jesus. Everybody. And say, what a good guy, Jesus was, and not recognize that when he came as God's final king, the Christ, the Messiah, the anointed one, whose kingdom would have no end. And you think you can acknowledge that and not bow your knee to him? What was that C.S. Lewis, how he put it? He said, there is no use saying you choose to lie down when it becomes impossible to stand up. That will not be the time for choosing. It will be the time we discover which side we really have chosen. Will we realize it before or not? You may not realize it, but you have chosen a side right now, where you're at this moment. You have chosen. Are you going to bow your knee to him or not? Are you going to know what he commands you to do? Or are you going to do it or not? Oh, I don't feel like doing that. There's no way I'm going to do that. You expect me to do that? You expect me just to forgive? You expect me to humble myself? No, no, no. I'm not going to do that. Or you can get up every day and take time to get before Him and acknowledge Him as your King, the Christ, the Christos, the Anointed One, the Messiah, and do the rightful thing. Bow down and worship and surrender to Him. Because God, I'm going to come across things in my life today I'm not going to feel like doing. Father, I want to know your way, and you tell me what your way is, I will obey it, whether I feel like it or not. Because that's what you do when you live your life in His kingdom. You choose to bow the knee to Him. But we've gotten into this mode, especially at Christmas time, where it's baby in a manger, and we're all good about that. The Magi knew, Mary and Joseph knew, that's not just a baby. That's not just a special baby. That's God's final king who's going to reign forever. And when a king is born, now you have a choice, and everybody in the world has a choice. What are they going to do with that? Choose to obey? Choose to participate in His kingdom? Or just believe? Yeah, I believe. And move on. And do life the way you want to do life. I'm afraid that because of the way that first Christmas was wrapped, we've lost sight of the gift. And we lost sight that when Jesus was born, we chose, whether we wanted to or not, whether we liked it or not, whether we realized it or not. We made a choice. And I think a lot of us have made the wrong choice. But you know what? It doesn't have to continue. You can decide right now this morning, He's my king. I will obey Him. I will participate in His kingdom. And I will follow the Christos. Because Rome, they didn't care what you believed. But they wanted your allegiance to be to Caesar. And that's where a lot of us live. I believe. But my allegiance is not going to be to Jesus. It's not going to be to obey Him, whether I like it or not. But because He's the king, I will bow down and worship and obey. So where are you at this morning? Where is He who's born King of the Jews? Because we come to worship Him. Is that why you're here this morning? Is that why you came? To worship Him? Because you do it every day? Because every day you get up and you go, Lord, I just want to obey you. I just want to participate in your kingdom. Is that why you're here today? We'll sing a song of invitation. And if you have a decision to make, maybe some of you have been playing that game where Jesus is someone you believe in, but He's not to you the Christos, the Christ, the final king. And maybe you're ready to make that decision. Because they didn't see this distinction in the early church. They didn't see a distinction between believing in Him and obeying Him in every part of their lives. That wasn't a distinction for them. That's just not the culture they grew up in. They knew that if He was who they said He was, that required them to obey Him. We just sort of put those things apart in our culture. You want to experience revival? Be a church that no longer sees those things as separate. that says, I can't say I believe in him without obeying him, without giving him the worship he desires. Maybe you're ready to do that. Let's stand together.